philosophers said that all human beings should live in conformity with their nature. And the only true wise person, that truly wise people know what that nature is, because they have the Logos of God's will within them. Philo of Alexandria, a great philosopher, Jewish as well, blends this Stoic idea of natural law with the Jewish idea of God, the Creator and the Lawgiver. And so we can see here the whole theory of natural law beginning to take shape. Now, in verses 17 to 24, we have a list of 5 privileges Jewish people have, followed by a list of 5 significant contributions Jews could be making to society because of their privileges. But, in fact, we end with a list of 5 ways the claim, in fact, isn't lived out in practice. The privileges are Jewish. I'm Jewish. I've got the law. I can take pride in God. I know God. I know God's will. And I can discern what's essential. So I can be, therefore, these contributions I can make, I could be a guide for others, a light, an instructor, a teacher, the embodiment of the knowledge and truth of the law. But there's a yawning gap. I may teach others, but I fail to teach myself. I may preach against stealing, yet I steal. I may say not to commit adultery, and yet I do. I abhor idols, yet I rob temples. I boast in the law, yet I dishonour God by breaking the law. So, what Paul concludes with is this rather sad statement. The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, because you're not living up to what you say you should be living up to. And there's a special sin, isn't there? A special sadness about sins committed by believers. They cause scandal. Much as the sins of terrorists are currently causing many people to turn away from belief in God because of the extremists, the fundamentalists. The third little section now is circumcision won't save the Jews either. Circumcision was widely practiced in the ancient Near East, and in Genesis chapter 17, where God renews the covenant with Abraham, circumcision is enjoined on him and his descendants. In the exile time, the Jews were surrounded by peoples who didn't practice circumcision, and so it came to be considered as distinctive of Jewish people. This, along with being administered on the 8th day of life, instead of as at puberty, as with, say, the Arab peoples, allowed it to be seen as a sign of the covenant, and a bit like baptism, entry into the holy people. The word is used metaphorically to express moral uprightness. For example, their ears are uncircumcised because they don't listen. Or, the days are coming when I'm going to punish all who are circumcised only in the flesh. For all these nations, I want circumcision of the heart. The real Jew is the one who is inwardly Jewish, and the real circumcision is of the heart. Something not of the letter, but of the spirit. That whole way of looking at things that Paul has is what he's talking about now. The real Jew isn't the one who is outwardly circumcised, but the one who is inwardly able to keep the law. The great prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, saw the need for a new covenant where God's own Spirit would change people's hearts so that they could accept the law and keep it. It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is useless, says St. John. A new heart I will give you, a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Ezekiel. The fourth little section is God's promise is not going to save the Jewish people either, or make them special. In this section, Paul uses a series of 5 rhetorical questions. The first of which is, what advantage has the Jew? Or what is the value of circumcision? And the reply is, firstly, they were entrusted with the oracles of God. The Jewish people do have a special grace. They are entrusted with the law, the most precious insight into how God wants human beings to live. And this is something the Jewish people must be grateful for. And they do. They are in their story from Deuteronomy. What other nation has a God so near to us as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call on him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances as just as the entire law that I'm setting before you today? And from Psalm 147, he declares his word to Jacob, his statutes and ordinances to Israel. He has not dealt thus with other nations. He has not taught them his decrees. So there's a strong sense of gratitude for the gift of the law. But in the next few questions, Paul seems to be saying that even though the Jews are faithless and don't keep that law, which they have as a gift, God goes on being faithful to his promises to them. Paul quotes Psalm 51, one of the great penitential psalms, which acknowledge that God indeed is right and just, even though human beings have sinned. And in his rather brilliant, popular commentary on Romans, Bishop Tom Wright, who's the Bishop of Durham, speaks of a further objection here. When Israel fails to deliver the message so that God has to find a new way of showing his faithfulness, that nearly makes God's truthfulness stand out all the more brightly. That merely does. God is even better. So why should God then be cross with Israel for not doing what was required? Why not simply do what is wrong so that God, in putting it right, can be seen to be even greater? And Paul says, well, that's silly. That's of course it's silly. And the final little objection that Paul's got in these 5 is, are the Jews really better off? And of course, with respect to how they live their lives and being judged by God, absolutely not. Because both Jews and Greeks are under the power of sin. And now the 5th and final little section is the grand finale to all of chapter 2 and the first half of chapter 3. All are sinners. And of course it's also the finale to the Gentile world as well, for both Jewish people and Gentile people. And in this extraordinary section now, Paul hammers home that all human beings, Jews as well as Gentiles, are sinful, and really we do stand in need of God's mercy. Brendan Byrne puts it this way. Paul grounds this charge, that all are sinful, with a chain of scriptural texts, quite unparalleled in the whole of the New Testament, both in their length, and they're single